Welcome to the TCS Network. I am Sylvie Frizzy and I'm interviewing author Afshan D'souza-Lodhi. And I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. Tell the people who you are.
Cool. Yes, my name's Afshan. I'm a poet and playwright. And yeah, wow, that kind of like, I knew it was coming and it still put me on the spot. What do I do? So I spend a lot of time writing and working in the literature and poetry and publishing industry. And then I do some sort of activism on the side when I've got energy. And at the moment working with Northern Police Monitoring Project, sort of monitoring police and holding the police to account.
Really, I feel like you've downplayed a bit. You were an award winning. Am I right on that one? Award winning.
I've won a few. Yeah, I've won a few awards.
We don't play imposter syndrome right here. You need take the flowers when you're here. You are award winning. Let's be clear.
I've done. Yeah, I think most recently I won an award for a play that I co-wrote called Santi and Naz, which played at the Vault Festival just before lockdown in February in London, and we won a debut Vault award for that, which was quite fun, quite exciting. And then I've just won some other kind of like small awards as well over time, mainly for plays and poetry.
You've been in the industry for a while, and we're here mainly to talk about Afshan's latest poetry collection called, and it can be interpreted how the reader sees it. So we're going to say Re-Desire. However you look at it. Isn't the title, I think the cover's amazing as well. I love it. Talk me.
Called Anthony Number, who designed the cover. Absolutely amazing. Runs a company called Catch 22. So yeah, find them on Instagram.
Coolly. All right, I want to go straight into it in terms of inspiration. What writers did you enjoy reading growing up?
So I grew up in a time when there weren't that many diverse writers, and I remember going into my school library and finding finding a book that I thought was from a diverse writer, from a non-white writer, and then I read all the series, and it was from Darren Shan. And when I picked it up, I misread the first book and thought it said Darren Shah, and Shah being like an Indian surname. So I read like the whole series because I was like, this is really great. I think I got to like the second book and was like, maybe like partway through, I was like, wait a minute, this is Darren Shan, not Darren Shah. And then by then, you've read two books, you're like, well, I might as well just read the rest of them. And then after that, I sort of made it a point to read mainly Black and Asian writers. So it was Bali Rai, Mallory Blackman with Noughts and Crosses back then is what I was sort of always asking the librarians to bring in. And then I was really lucky in that when I went to university, I had linked up in Manchester with a poet and publisher called Adam Lowe, and we connected really well. He works at People Shoe Press, which is mainly a Black publisher. They publish in the Caribbean, in India, and then the UK. And they do a lot of Black writers, a lot of Asian writers, and those are the writers that I grew up, I guess, sort of like reading and being inspired by.
I remember growing up, I loved Benjamin Zephaniah and John Agard.
Yes.
They were there. And do you know what I actually loved about it? It was such an unconscious thing that I loved them. So I didn't even know specifically. I think I knew down the line that Benjamin Zephaniah was like a Black man with dreadlocks, but at first it wasn't even a race thing. They were just authors and poets that I really connected with. And then it became clearer, as you get older, maybe the extra reason as to why you were able to connect more, because the stories and that you could relate to and you could tell now, as an adult, that this was actually diverse. So your new book is out.
I mean, the one white poet that I really enjoyed reading as a kid was Seamus Heaney, and only because like he has one line which is between my finger and my thumb the squat pen rests as snug as a gun, and I think I really enjoyed it because it had the word gun in, and I really hadn't seen like that sort of imagery in poetry, because poetry was all like Keats and Shelley, and it was all like about love and about trees and quite a bit boring to read as a kid. And then you had Seamus Heaney who was talking about guns, and I was like, amazing, this is what I want to read. And also he's writing as an outsider, as someone who's Irish, sort of that perspective, which within like a, you know, very English, because it was, you know, English poetry perspective, was really nice to hear that outsider's perspective. So I think I enjoyed his work as well for those reasons, is that, yeah, you're an outsider kind of like looking in and trying to work out where you fit into the wider sphere of things.
Cool. So today is Windrush Day. So we've witnessed uprising in the UK in varying forms, be it, like I said, the recent Windrush scandal or the Black Lives Movement outrage. In terms of, I think England has been the only country where people have actually went and complained, or not even complained, but actually actively marched against the BLM movement. And I've noticed through a lot of your writing, you are very clear of your different identities. So are there any factors that make you feel torn about being British?
So many, so many. It's weird because I'm from a generation, I'm technically first generation in that I wasn't born here. But or it's called like 1.5 generation. There's a poem in the collection that's about that, which is where I'm not actually, I'm not first generation. I'm first generation, but I'm also like not first because I came in before I was 5, or like just at 5. So my understanding of like the UK and like Britain is like from my parents' perspective. And I guess like a lot of it like hinges on nationality and passport, you know, and which passport queue you come on. So you know, we talk about like a Maroon passport and that being what makes us British, and then you have all the rest of it, the racism and the fascism, and you know, marching against, I think the BBC called it like an anti Black Lives Matter protester or something, and I was like, you mean racist? Because it's not anti Black Lives Matter, they're just full on racist, that's it. They're not, and it was just that kind of like wordplay that they were trying to, or you know, someone was arguing against, someone was anti Black Lives Matter protesters, so I was like, so they were arguing against racists then, is what they were trying to say. But the kind of like wordplay and like somersaults that newspapers are doing to not call people racist when that's what they are, makes me feel a little bit like, you know, questioning my British identity. But then also, that is what being British is. It's that prudish nature of not questioning things in that way and not saying things as they are, which is really, really annoying. I think I like to think of myself as someone that is quite active, I think. So, you know, I call myself a sometimes activist when I've got energy. And I feel because that, you know, it comes down to energy, especially now. And like a lot of my work is about resisting sort of patriarchy and challenging the structures that exist, particularly like recently it's about police brutality, and a lot of my work is around that. And when you look at the police and you look at racism and how ingrained that is, it's a very Western, it's a very British thing, right? Colonialism is a very British thing, and slavery was as well, but there's a denial of that within our history. So we grow up not knowing these things and not associating Britain with, you know, when we associate Britain with slavery, it's about abolishing slavery. When we associate Britain with the police, we talk about, you know, how great the police have been in terms of like bringing crime down, right? We don't talk about the fact that the racism, you couldn't call the police racist until 2000, you know, and the Anti-Racist Act, the Discrimination Act was from 1965. So it's like between 1965 to 2000, you couldn't even call the police racist, which is like, that's nuts. They're people, like it's absolutely nuts and insane. So that's really ingrained in British history, and it's like, that challenges my identity on whether or not I feel British or whether or not I am British. And then you have British people, you have white people that will challenge, and you might understand this as well, like they'll challenge where you're from and where you're really from, and you know, you need to go home, and I am home in Manchester, like where do you want me to go? I'm in my own freaking place now as well. You know, there's a legal document that says this is my home.
This is mine.
This is my home, this is mine. Like, what do you want me to do? And that challenges it. But then I also feel part of being British and part of being South Asian is, and part of being an activist or a woman of colour in the UK is about resisting that and being active with it.
With diversity slowly coming into this, yes. you were in the publishing industry. Let's call a spade a spade. Is the publishing industry diverse enough?
No. Full stop.
Full stop. Period. Why isn't it like, what's been your experience as a new author? What's been your experience? Because remember now, we're not talking about the 1990 publishing in the 2000s. This is 2020. What has been your experience as a South Asian woman in 2020? What's been your publishing experience?
I mean, even getting this book published, right? Which and it's my first full collection,
Okay.
but it's my first publishing. It's not my first published book. So I've edited quite a few books before. I've got short stories and essays and collections. Another book of mine is coming out. I've got a short story in a book coming out in August as well, called Match Made in Heaven. And so I'm doing work in publishing as a publisher, as an editor, and then as a writer for a long time. And still, when it came to publishing this book, there were so many microaggressions and aggressions, even drop the word micro. They were just racism.
Point blank.
It was just racism, and so much of it was virtue signaling from publishers that wanted to feel like they were doing the right thing by working with a South Asian Muslim woman. That they were like, oh great, if we put Afshan's name down, then it will feel like we're a good publisher. So there was a couple of
tick, like they done their bit.
Yeah, and that's how they talk about me. When they were talking publicly, it was, oh, we're a diverse publisher. We publish, Muslim writers like Afshan. And I was like, hold on a second. You haven't published me just like, whoa.
Okay. So they tokenized you effectively.
Yeah.
Some of them had tried to do.
Other writers as well. Other writers of colour that I spoke to, Black writers, afterwards told me of the difficulty they had with the publisher. And I say difficulty because this is going to sound, anyway, I'm a poet, so here goes. So like writing a book is like having a baby, right? You want it to be like this perfect thing, the feel of it, the look of it, the words you use, whether it's capital letters or not, how many pages it has, the thickness, everything is like, you want it to be an experience, especially if you're publishing a physical book.
It's your body of art. I mean, you've got the vision, you know exactly what you want, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So it's there were loads of arguments I was having with my ex-publisher, the publisher who was initially going to publish me, about capital letters, and I don't like using capital letters in my name, and I don't like using it in my poetry, mainly because I come from an Urdu writing tradition which doesn't have capitalization, and capital letters feel quite aggressive and they feel quite proper, and a lot of my poetry is about challenging the idea of what is proper and what is not, right, about perspective. So we argued back and forth about, down to like whether or not my name would be in capital letters on the cover, whether or not the title would be in capital letters on the cover. And they just didn't understand. They didn't understand what was going on. They didn't understand what I was trying to do. And it felt very like dogmatic and very white male perspective on publishing.
For example, the way that you described your Urdu background, the language, and even you've got, there's a little bit in the book where you explain sort of the fluidity of the language. Mm-hmm. It's like, it makes sense. And if I'm telling you as the author, as the poet, that this is my vision, why are you beefing me on this?
The worst part was they wanted me to do a glossary, like a proper glossary, and I've got one in here, but it's a fun, like it takes the piss out of a glossary, right? But
yeah.
The publisher wanted me to do like a proper glossary, and to the point that they wanted me to explain the ideas and themes that were not English. Which, if my entire book is about that, like there was a point where I was writing out what Bollywood songs had inspired a particular line, or what tradition it had come from, or the similarities. I was basically doing like the GCSE context work that you do when you do English Lit, and you take a poem apart for the publisher, and that was going to be part of the glossary and part of the author notes. And I was like, why am I explaining my poetry? Why are you assuming that my main audience is going to be white? And even
that they wouldn't know.
Yeah, but even if they are white, like Google exists, right? I read loads of fiction, and I find words in English that I don't understand or I don't know the definition of. It doesn't mean that I can't keep reading. I either take my phone out and Google it, or I skip over the word and I still understand what it means. And we do that on a regular basis, and we've been doing that since we were like tiny kids. It's what we're taught to do. We don't go, oh, I can't read this word, therefore I'm just going to stop reading, end of.
You read it, you take stuff from it, and you look, I've got notes, I've taken notes. You go and do your research. Come on, it's ridiculous.
It really is. So I took out all the italics for all of the foreign words in it. Yeah. And what's really, so I speak a few different languages, and I've come from like a Muslim tradition and a Christian tradition.
Tell me the languages.
My work, So Urdu, Konkani, English, then bits of Punjabi and Arabic. There's very few people that can understand all 5 of the languages, because Konkani is such it's a language that's seeped in Christianity, and Arabic's a language seeped in Islam. That you very rarely get people that have both of those religious traditions from those backgrounds that come together that can speak and understand both of it. So the idea of alienation and the idea of like being othered was something that I wanted everybody at some point to feel when they were reading this collection, because that's how I feel on a daily basis going outside. So I was really keen to not italicize any of the words, and I think the only time that I italicize something is in mother tongue with the word English. I think actually throughout the entire time, if I use the word English, it's italicized. And then I think once when it's the Arabic is italicized. But yeah, I made an active decision to not italicize the words, because you know they're not foreign, they're not other for me. They are they're the languages that I use, or the words that I use. They just slip in.
Yeah, and I mean, effectively, until you were at least 5, they were your mother tongue and father tongue. English is the newbie to you. Do you know what I mean?
English is my second language. Yeah, technically English is my second language.
It reminds me of Toni Morrison. I really loved her, and she said that she had an interview, and she was asked, I think she was asked by Oprah Winfrey, and the question was basically, some people say that they have to reread your text because they don't really get it the first time, and she said, good. She said, that is what you call reading. That is reading. If you don't get it, you read again. Exactly. And it's that notion where, do you want me to paint out everything for you, or are you going to read and have a bit of common sense and actually paint your own picture? And I thought it was really powerful. You know, we've got authors like R.H. Sin, we've got Samantha King Holmes, we've got Robert M. Drake. How has social media contributed? Has it uplifted poetry? Has it killed it? Where's your views?
I'm of the belief that it has uplifted poetry. So Rupi Kaur is a poet, Instagram poet. She started on Instagram, and she was quite controversial in the poetry world. And she's controversial to predominantly, in my opinion, white people that are quite elitist when it comes to poetry, because their belief is that not everybody should be able to write poetry. So when you have Instagram poetry, you're then opening up poetry to the masses. You're watering it down, or you're removing the complexity. You know, essentially, they just want something that's a bit more complex to read. And that's a style. You know, I mean, I don't necessarily like all of Rupi's poetry, but I rate her as a poet because she's made a shit ton of money over poetry, which is unheard of in the industry. Like, I have no qualms. I'm never going to make more than like $1,000 or maybe like $2,000 off selling this book. You know, I highly doubt it. And if I make that much, I'll be like incredibly pleased with it. It's not going to be a bestseller book. I'm not going to make millions, essentially. But Rupi
never say never.
Well, you know, I feel like this book is slightly cursed, so maybe another book, maybe another poetry book. But, you know, I make money out of performing. That's where my money comes from for poetry. But Rupi's made her money off selling a book, of selling poetry, of Instagram poetry. And she's brought it to predominantly people of colour, predominantly women, that associated with those themes and ideas.
But let's open up the book. What is your favourite poem from the collection, and why?
Ooh. So my favourite poem to perform is, I won't be able to find it now. It's called Mogul Mowgli.
Okay.
And it's my favourite poem to perform because I was, at one point I was going to quite a lot of South Asian poetry nights, and there was this theme that was coming up. I remember performing it one night, and somebody came up after me, and she performed. She said, "Oh, this poem is inspired by, you know, in response to Afshan's poem." But her poem was exactly the kind of poetry that I was calling out within this piece. You know, and I was just like, she clearly didn't get the poem at all, because she was like, "Oh, you know, Afshan talks about tea, and I've got this poem about tea and about how I'm tea coloured and and you know, the tea bag was pulled out too." And I was like, "Oh my God, no!" She completely misunderstood what my piece was about, because it's calling out that kind of poetry. So I really like it.
She thought you were bigging it up.
It feels, yeah. And I was like, "No, honey, no. It's supposed to be taking the piss." Yeah, so I quite like it because of that. And this was written like 4 years ago, and even in here there's a line, we exchange Twitter handles where we describe ourselves as Desi activists, use hashtag BLM to improve our Twitter ratio, right? And there's this idea within, particularly now, we've got words like virtue signaling and performative allyship, and particularly in the South Asian community, when it comes to movements like Black Lives Matter, there's all of like the surface work, like use a hashtag, retweet, share something on Instagram, but none of the deeper work where it comes to like funding the community work or the organizations, actually doing the petitions and writing letters and doing the organizing part that is hard work. It's all the kind of like performative level activism.
Okay.
So yeah, I was writing about this then, and now we're in 2020 and we're still on this.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is slightly depressing.
No, it really is. So, okay, if this poem was written 4 years ago, how long did it take you to make this collection?
Oh God. So I wrote, there was a version of this that existed probably like 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, 2016. I entered it to a competition and I got shortlisted. And it was with the same publisher that I was going to publish the book. And then in the space of a year, I wrote the rest of the poetry. And there were already bits that I'd written or had written for a long time. They just had to be molded. I think the most recent poem in here is probably 1.5. But yes, these poems have been probably about 5-6 years in the making. And some of them even longer than that. I mean, Mother Tongue I've been performing for God knows how long. And it's people really like me performing it, and I've made a lot of money performing it.
Yeah, 1.5. I have a quote that I really like, what I find very interesting. It says, I buy bangles from Amazon because I'm too ashamed to walk into a high street shop and ask the uncle for chudian and pronounce it wrong. Did I just pronounce it wrong?
No, it's fine.
Oh. My wrists have but I think this is a very strong part. My wrists may have been made for the constant clanging of glass against glass, but smashing the patriarchy makes me bleed.
Yeah.
And I felt that. I was like, ooh, I was like, that's deep. That's real deep.
Thank you. There's a lot of I think this poem was written for performance, 1.5, and I very rarely write for performance. So Mother Tongue is a performance poem that I wrote because my mum had heard and read some of my more sexual poetry, and she was like, okay, do you have to write about sex all the time? Are you trying to be the next 50 Shades of Grey? Write something about me, write something about your mum. So I was like, okay, cool. So I wrote Mother Tongue, which was like my tame poem. And the reason I performed it so much is because I do performances in so many mixed audiences with like kids in, and Mother Tongue is like the nice poem to perform, because some of the others are quite dark in the collection, and they're not really easily performable. And 1.5 is like that. It's another performance poem that I wrote to perform. But it's become like one of the other favorites that people really enjoy listening to, because even though the references are so specific, the ideas behind it thread to a lot of migrant experience, and a lot of this like not being of here or there.
It makes it relatable, very much so.
Yeah, there was actually a call just before this. I was speaking to somebody in Mexico, and they have a saying as well, which is like, you're neither of here nor there. And it's this idea that you're stuck between two different places and two different identities constantly. And there's a lot of theory about this when it comes to like hybridity and identity and things like that. So I really wanted to encompass that in a piece that felt like you could laugh at it, but also understand the political nature of the identity as well.
What did your mum think about the poem, Mother Tongue?
I don't think Mother Tongue she loved. Of course she did.
Yeah.
Like she was like, we went to India and she was like, oh, do that Mother Tongue poem, do the Mother Tongue poem. And it's because it's got like one line of Konkani in it, and she's like, oh, my daughter, she's got this poem in Konkani, and then I'll be like with my grandma, and she'd be like, yeah, do the poem. I'm like,
she loves it. Your collection, it comes out on what date?
So on the 25th of June, but you can pre-order copies now from Amazon, from your independent bookshops as well. Support the indies, and then you can buy it from my site. From my website, afshandl.com/re desire. And you can also buy Book Launch in a Box from my website as well.
Amazing. I wish you all the best with this book. I have a signed copy. I'm just gonna throw it out there. I have a signed copy.
You've got tabs in there. That makes me
I
so
do.
happy.
I'm gonna do a book review on my website because I'm very excited about this book. I am.